Hi there, and welcome to the May live stream for BAC-chat. Today I'm being joined by Chris Irwin of J2 Innovations, and we're going to talk about semantic data tagging, what it is and why it's so important to our industry. So without further ado, I will let Chris introduce himself. Hello, Chris.
Hi, yes, I'm Chris Irwin. I'm working currently with J2 Innovations. I've been in the building automation industry for a very long time, about 35 years. Been with the Trend originally, and then growing a business called Sonte, and then working with Tridium, building up Niagara Framework for, well, 2 stints, 12 years, also with Distech, and now with J2 Innovations. So very interested to be here to talk about tagging. Very exciting times in our industry. I mean, the last 4 or 5 years probably has seen more change and disruption because of IoT than the previous 15, I suppose. It's kind of interesting times.
Excellent. Well, let's get into it. One of the first things really is a very broad question. Now, I tend to work at the nuts and bolts end of the industry, and the idea of data tagging is somewhat confused, certainly by my peers at the engineering level. Data tagging and mnemonics, so choosing a naming convention for your sensor, etc. And there is a distinction between the two, with data tagging obviously being much more useful. How would you sort of define data tagging? What's the differentiator? What makes data tagging so much better than just choosing a naming convention?
Well, I think the problem the industry has had from way back, back in the day, I think we were limited to 16 characters on a label that for a sensor or an actuator, and every engineer or some the bigger companies tried to standardize it a bit, but basically every project ended up being different naming syntax because you choose different abbreviations for the label. And now the labels have got longer. That's less severe as a problem in the sense you have a fighting chance of understanding what the engineer meant when he labeled it up. But unfortunately, computers and computer software specifically doesn't cope with that kind of ambiguity. They need everything fully defined. So there is, and this exists in many other industries, and of course, and on the web. I mean, tagging and the idea of metadata, which is what we're really talking about, has been used throughout the web when we're trying to index things and trying to find things. You need to have a proper system for standardized way of representing the description of not just the data itself, its units of measure and the value, but also the context of the data. And this is where semantic tagging comes in and the idea of metadata. And tagging is better because it is, first of all, creating a dictionary of definitions that are very precise and therefore reusable. And that means the data can be fully abstracted. So instead of having to care about where the data has come from in terms of which system it was connected to and things like that, energy analytics software and other things that you want to do with the data coming from buildings can operate quite independently of the multiplicity of sources from various manufacturers and systems. And the industry desperately needs this standardization, but has been very slow to adopt it compared with other industries.
Sure. That's a great sort of nutshell explanation, and I think it leads on quite nicely to the idea of standardization. Now, there's a few naming conventions out there. People might be familiar with the name brick as a tagging convention, but the one that certainly I've been familiar with, and I know the Fin framework, which is J2's product, uses, is Project Haystack. What if you hear Project Haystack, it sounds like we're just talking about farmyard animals. What is the idea behind Project Haystack?
Well, as you say, there are several initiatives, and Project Haystack of those is the longest running and therefore the most widely deployed. The use of the word haystack, I think it must derive from the idea of finding a needle in a haystack. It's to do with the fact you're trying to find something specific in a mass of data or hay. You just find the nugget that you want, the needle. Project Haystack started as because of this recognition of how valuable the data was becoming and the need to make a more precise definition of it for analytics software to deal with. Founder members J2 and Siemens and Legrand and Sky Foundry and others got together and started a collaboration and set up working groups and a whole process for defining a dictionary initially of these definitions or tags. And so, for example, if you're defining a chilled water valve, you would add the tag. First of all, it's a point. It's not a floor or an equipment or a site. So it's a data point, and it's going to have the tags of being a valve, and then what kind of valve, a water valve, and then it'll have a tag cool to represent the fact that it's chilled water valve we're talking about, not a heating water valve. And then crucially, it'll also have location tags. So it'll say what it belongs to. So it's in air handling unit 1, and that's on floor 2, maybe, and in building city center or whatever building it is that we're talking about. And I demo this when I'm talking with potential customers of J2, because we, as you rightly say, our software is utilizing this and leveraging the value of that tagging to automate things that otherwise would be very complicated or manual activities as they are in other BeMS software. So we can simplify the engineering processes around creating a configured project using a BeMS because we use tagging, because that lets you do all sorts of smart stuff, which we can get into if you want. But you can consider tagging as like a markup language for building data. So like on the web, you know, we all know that web pages are made with HTML or HTML5 now, but that's fine. You know, HTML was designed to be a human markup language, but if you look at the code, it's readable, you can make sense of it, and it delivers the result, which is a nicely laid out graphical page. And tagging is equally like that. It could be done in a very programmy kind of way, but actually the value of having it with tags and so on is it's actually understandable as well when you read it.
Sure. And is it fair to say as well with tagging, we're not just grouping the data, but we're establishing relationships between those tags as well? You mentioned valves, so you can say that this valve belongs to this equipment, belongs to this building. Is that something that is inherently in it?
Yeah, so now we're getting into the issues of ontology and taxonomy. Initially, as I mentioned, Haystack started as a dictionary definition, and then people realized that actually, well, if we define a way of communication, we could use it as a protocol. So there's also a defined protocol, Haystack over REST, using web services type technology for that. So that's nice because it's not like BAC-net, which is only known about by building services people. You know, REST is used as a RESTful communications used all over the world for all sorts of IT related things. And then the thinking evolved that you actually need a structure to the data. And you mentioned Brick, and I think Brick has garnered interest because it came at it from the other end. Haystack started coming at it from the definitions of tags. That we've got all this data. How do we define it in a consistent way? They came at it from how do we data model a building? How do we structure the architecture of the data and create a model? And then, meanwhile, Haystack in parallel, seeing what Brick was doing, also said, well, yeah, that's right. We need to create a structure for this data. So Haystack 4 came out for public consultation in 2019. I think it was March because I was at a Life and Building or something exhibition. Was released, and that introduced a full data structure model as well. So these are different initiatives. All are trying to achieve the same thing. There's another one called UDMI, which has been proposed by Google and Arabs and people. And all of these are heading in the same direction because they're trying to say we need a consistent and standardized way of defining our data because labeling doesn't cut it. Sure. It's never going to work.
Just on a little sort of sideways note to that, and I'm sure you do have a particular, is this going to end up being VHS and Betamax? If you choose the wrong one, you could end up with bigger problems.
Well, I certainly hope not, but I think I'm pretty sure they won't be like that because, first of all, they are all related in many ways. I think UDMI have learnt some stuff from Brick as well, and there's probably some Brickish stuff within it. I don't know. I haven't got into it in enough detail. But what we are as J2, we're saying, well, we're going to support these open standards as they emerge. I mean, the UDMI initiative is much more recent. I think it's only went on GitHub this year, and these things need time to evolve and mature. What we'll do when it's appropriate, we'll I'm sure do a mapping between them, because what matters is you've got a data model. But if one is slightly different from another one, you can map across relatively easily, and I think that's what will happen. And there'll probably be automatic utilities to enable that to happen.
Sure.
Whereas if you take the VHS and Betamax, a classic technology, I mean, you could also talk about bus wars and wireless bus wars, Zigbee, Z-Wave, and Ocean and so on. But these are all completely incompatible technologies, one or the other. But with this data standardization, it's not like that. I think there's going to be a bit of work to do if you're trying to mix and match them. But I think it will be a much easier process, because fundamentally we want a data model and we all need the tagging.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. In terms of the data, one of the things that struck me, I've had very limited hands-on experience with Haystack, but is the ability to create graphics automatically from a template, which I just found this to be a huge benefit. I know it has much wider implications. This is probably one of its most simplistic uses, but to create a template and then dynamically be able to generate graphics because you're just drawing out the data seems to be a huge advantage, where you don't need to replicate the same information over and over again and then link it all together. I mean, I've spent hours linking graphics to data points before now, and yes, there's ways to speed that up, but data tagging, properly doing it at the outset, seems to eliminate this altogether if you do it properly. Is that
absolutely, yeah. I think that was the whole thinking behind embedding it in Fin framework as it was being evolved. Conceptually, it was leveraging that tagging. We call it the payoffs of tagging. You have to spend a bit of time up front adding those tags to the data that you're coming in from BACnet or Modbus or other devices. And there are various ways, as you say, to do that. And we have a tool set in the software to let you clone and copy and paste and so on. But the best way is if you can work with templates, as you say, and then everything is pre-tagged. So if you've got a Modbus meter that you're using all the time, from one particular manufacturer, of course, Modbus is the worst case because you've just got registers. They don't take, there's nothing really helping you. BACnet at least has object concepts, but with Modbus, it's just registers. So you add those tags once and create it in the Fin tool, then save it, and then that's a file that you can reuse, you can share with other people for other projects, and you just reuse, and you create a library of those templates, and then you're massively speeding up your engineering. The other thing that happens in Fin is that we relativize because of tagging. So control logic, alarm logic, or what we call smart alarms, and fault detection diagnostics and graphics can all be relativized using the tags. So what I mean by that is you create the graphic for a fan coil unit, say, once, and then when you create it, you say you want it relativized, and then that means that it will apply itself to all the other instances that have the same tags. So if you've got 1,000 fan coils in the building, you've got one graphic, and it will represent each of those fan coil units as you look at them.
Excellent. I mean, that's certainly...
Just to add, the real-world experience of one of our OEM partners, Siemens, in the North American market, they were previously using a different technology, or their partners were, and now when they use Fin, they call it Desigo Optic. The reports we're getting back, and I admit it, I'm not talking to the guy directly, but we're hearing that they're saying that there's something between 30-50% engineering saving by using our software, and then sometimes as much as 80%. And I can imagine that on big repetitive projects, because that's when you have the most clicks and linking and copy and pasting, sure, and all the rest of it. And that's where you get the most benefit from the templates.
Exactly, and that's certainly where I've personally seen the benefit. But I mean, one of the one of the things that it took me just a short while to get my head around was there is work to be done at the beginning. If you're going to do things properly, you do need to make sure the tags are right. But once you've got the tags right, then the rest kind of falls into place, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly right. It's a different way of thinking about it, and you have to invest the effort up front. So when you pull the data in, and tagging can be taken to various levels. You can get really, really lots and lots of extra tags, but there is a certain minimum number that you need in order to make the Fin software actually do its smart stuff or clever stuff and create things automatically, as it were.
Yeah. One thing which I don't know if you've sort of considered or whether this comes up as a topic of conversation. I was working with a Lithuanian guy, and he was struggling to understand some of the naming conventions in the tags. Is language a barrier to this, or is it something which is already built in? We just need to work out how different people are going to use it if they're speaking different languages, because it's obviously started as an American thing.
Yes, you raise a very good point. I mean, it is all in English or American, whatever. Yeah, so anyone who's not native English speaking is going to probably have a little bit harder time because you're using a bit of jargon in terms of the way you're defining things. So they won't be able to understand the definitions maybe quite as easily. The reality is, though, that the world is using English as a common language for in our industry. But yes, you do raise a good point. But then equally, once you've developed templates again, then you're kind of getting rid of the problem a bit because only one person needs to understand the English, and then the guy implementing it doesn't need to know so much, in order to work it out. I haven't encountered. I was just reading today, or a blog or a post on LinkedIn when Siemens again in Finland have just implemented or were posting about their first project using Visigo Optic. So they're managing. Having said that, the Finnish have very good English, so maybe in Lithuania not so much.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. Can you, is it possible within Haystack to define freeform tags, so you could effectively create a Dutch version of Haystack, or is it too structured that it needs to be in English?
No, you can create custom tags. Yeah, I'm just thinking about it. Actually, program languages as well have the same thing. There are a lot of those, or most of those, are actually done in English, aren't they? I mean, it just means as a programmer, you need to learn the specific definitions of each of the words that are used. If you think about BASIC, for example, very old language, or anything like that, it's text readable if you know English. So. Yes, you can create custom tags, and so in theory you could create your own dictionary, but then you are reinventing the standard, as it were. And then, but the whole point of having a common one is that it's then interoperable, so you can have different vendors all providing systems and outputting Haystack messages on REST or whatever mechanism, and then you've got a data abstraction that's common. So. The problem of compatibility goes away. I mean, BAC-net goes some way. I mean, the industry at the moment is in a sort of BAC-net age, isn't it, where most people seem to be standardizing on BAC-net for the HVAC controls, at least. And so specifiers are saying, oh, it's got to be BAC-net. And then that means that, however many different sites, you've got 100 sites in a retail chain or restaurants or whatever, or office blocks in your portfolio, and they're all BAC-net, then you've got to fight, you can use a common piece of software to look at all those sites. But the trouble with BAC-net is it doesn't fully define the metadata. It doesn't have enough tags. It does have tags. It tells you whether it's a numeric or a binary. It tells you whether it's commandable, and you can. There are various things you can derive from BAC-net, and that again, Fin framework does that automatically. If you're working with BAC-net, it will automatically add the tags if they're there. I was saying Modbus didn't get much help, but the problem is they don't go all the way. So there is a committee within ASHRAE that is actually looking at developing a standard. There's a specific committee, I forget the name of it now, it's 622 or something obscure. And they have been working, and I don't know quite the latest status, but they were certainly looking at both Brick and Haystack and deriving something from that to enable BAC-net to have a more full definition. The other issue, of course, for the industry is that the software that most people are working with doesn't support tagging. I mean, Niagara does. They've added it on to, in the Niagara 4, they added it as a capability. So you add the tags as you configure, or after you've configured Niagara within its natively. That's what you do up front. So there's a bit of a difference there. But we're both frameworks are supporting tagging, but a lot of other software isn't. So then, how do you implement it? But you can go back and add tagging afterwards, but it's much, much better to go and add it at the beginning.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of analytics vendors who are working with Haystack now.
Yeah, I'm sort of seeing it. It's more and more out there. You're seeing Project Haystack supports Haystack, etc. One of the things for an engineer on the ground like me, if someone said, right, we're doing this project and we need to implement data tagging. We've got to get Project Haystack tags in this. I've got a bunch of controllers that I'm always working at. Now, I'm right in saying, we wouldn't be looking at the controller end of this at the moment, and certainly with the Fin framework, the tags themselves sit in a central database. So the data comes in and the tags are added on at that point, to oversimplify it a little bit, but it sits at the server part and not actually at the field components.
Well, I think that's to do with the evolution of the software that's used in controllers. Yes, the current generation of controllers, none of them are, some of them might be on IP, but there's still a lot that aren't. They're on serial, and it has to be, if it's going to be Haystack over REST, which is the standard declared communications protocol where you can transmit those tag data, then you need to have an IP device. Now, the IP device, some of the more modern ones could potentially implement tagging at the device level, at the fan core level, or at the BAV level, if they wanted to. I'm not aware that they have. So, yeah, it tends to be that you're adding the tags, you're taking the data in as BAC-net and adding the tags at some sort of global controller level or server level, as you say. But it could be from the edge. I think that's the ideal. There is a company I was talking to, not this year, well, not pre-COVID, who were working on a very low-level framework, but with IP-connected devices, and they were saying they wanted to implement Haystack tagging. Now, I don't know if they have gone ahead and done that, but that would be interesting, because there's no reason why not. And that's the best way, that everything is then coming pre-tagged. And another company we're engaged with at the moment is wanting to is proposing to building owners the idea that they will have a common IP infrastructure for the building, which is a converged infrastructure for the OT, the operational technology like the BeMS, and also the IT systems. And they'll use a Haystack as a way of defining what can hang on that network. So they'll require that everyone who's supplying equipment supplies a Haystack profile for it, so that what's needed in the way of tagging is already there, even if it's only in an Excel spreadsheet, because that just makes it much easier to then import into the software, whatever it is.
That sounds like an excellent idea to me. It is clear we're seeing more and more tagging occurring in everything we do. You mentioned earlier about the web technologies. Anyone who uses Twitter is hashtag this, hashtag that. So we've been tagging things for a long time, and it does seem that sort of the future of building technologies. Where do you think, just going to close this sort of, or bring this conversation to a close, but where do you think we are now? Do you think we're doing enough, or do you think there's still a lot more work to do to onboard the idea of semantic tagging as a general concept within BeMS, or do you think people are there? We just need to be, just need to be getting on and doing it now.
I think we just need to get on and do it, yes, but it obviously needs to be done in a thoughtful, good way. I think there's roles for different people. First of all, end users need to be sort of realizing there's value in this. And if they say, oh, no, I want my data in a standardized way, and please can I have it tagged, that's a step in the right direction. So then that'll influence consultants then to specify and say, hey, look, we really need this to be done in a standard way. And then that will then drive the suppliers to say, oh, right, we've got to supply software that can deliver that. And I think all parts of the industry need to get on board with this is important. We need to get a move on. We're it's a very conservative industry historically. It's being megally disrupted by IoT players coming in, and all sorts of different business propositions around that as well. And then you've got other factors like move to the cloud and all the rest of it. And then the rise back of edge computing, because as computers get cheaper, you can do more of the analytics and stuff at the edge as well. So there's lots of stuff going on, a lot of moving parts, and I think this is just one of them. But I think certainly I think it would be great if people get behind Project Haystack, because it's, as I say, already widely deployed. Tens of thousands of buildings are using it. I know there's many vendors, and I bumped into people on the other side of the world, in Australia or in Finland or in all over the place, who I have got on board and started using it in their software, and actually Project Haystack don't even know about it necessarily, because they can just go on the website, pick it up, and use it. It's all there. The documentation is there. We've made it recently very much easier as well to implement Haystack, because J2 Innovations has contributed something called Haystack Core, which is an implementation of the Haystack 4 standard in TypeScript. Now, I don't know if people seem not to be very familiar with TypeScript, but it's basically like a superset of JavaScript. Sorry, let's be clear, because JavaScript and Java are completely different things. So it's a TypeScript is a future commonly, or will be commonly used programming language, and the advantage of that is that there's a lot of people out there who could just pick that up and turn that into a product, really. So that I think it will get easier in time to implement this Haystack.
Okay. Chris, thank you very much for joining us this evening. That's some really insightful stuff there, and hopefully the live viewers have found that useful. And like I say, this will be archived, and it'll certainly be worth going through. It's been really useful from my point of view as well. I think I should perhaps change my thinking. But thanks very much for joining us, and I hope 2021 starts to improve as we all get out there.
We all hope for that, don't we? We have freedom back, and be able to actually go out and enjoy ourselves as well as working all the time, instead of working all the time, perhaps.
Thanks very much, Chris.
Well, thank you. Bye. All right, cheers. Bye-bye.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of May BAC-chat. If you are enjoying these videos, then please hit that subscribe button, although you probably already have if you're watching this. But we do sort of, this is done in my spare time. We do need topics. We need people to come in and talk about our industry. So if you've got any ideas and you want to get involved, you want to get in the discussion, then please hit me up on LinkedIn, leave some comments on YouTube, and I'd be more than happy to talk to you about topics in the BeMS industry. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you all have another safe month. We'll see you next month, June, for another episode of BAC-chat. Bye for now.